In this video, we're going to focus on how we can create a nice scroll bar in Chart.js. As you can see here, as I scroll through it, you will see that the scale will always be visible no matter what we do here. And even if we add up more items, it will only extend the scrolling effect, but it will not remove or hide our scale here on the X scale. So let's start to look how we can create this. So let's start to look how to create a scrollable horizontal bar chart with fixed X scale in Chart.js. So the first thing what we need is, of course, we're going to get a border template, which you can find on chartjs3.com. Getting started, this specific link you can find as well in the description box. Once you're on here, copy this chunk of code. If you want to understand this code, please watch this video here that explains it all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just paste this all in there. I'll cut out the title, put the title in here, and save that, refresh. There we are. So what I'm going to do now is I will not maximize this yet, because what I want is I want to have a second chart in here. So then copy this, put that in there, scroll down, and then just copy this entire item and duplicate that. So I'm going to put it in there. There we are. And make sure we have the proper names for that, which will be my chart number 2. ID will be number 2. The config will be config number 2. And for the data, we're going to colon data 2. So we're not allowed to use here the ES6 shorthand because we have a different name for the data object. So that's this one here. There we are. So now we have this. If I save that, and before I even do that, I need to make sure that this ID here is ID number 2. Save, refresh. There we are. So this works nicely. But what I want to do eventually, and this is basically what we're doing, we're going to create here the chart. And you might say, why are we creating two charts? Well, I have to get a scroll effect. To do this scroll effect, we're going to basically work with two charts, but we're going to hide everything from the second chart. So you only have this scale here. So basically, we're sticking another chart or canvas below the chart with the bars. But anyway, once you see this step by step, it will make more sense. So what we need to do next is to create a horizontal line, a horizontal bar chart. So we're going to say here, after the option, we're going to say here index, axis will be on the Y, and of course the same will be on the bar chart number 2. So we say here in the options, save, refresh. There we are. So now we have this. And what we want to do here is, if I go up here, we could even say here maybe 80%. Let's see if it will not be too large. And as you can see, that's too large because we have too many items. Let's make this 50% for now. Alright, that looks quite fine. So what I'm going to do next is basically, we're going to remove the legend here. We don't need the legend here, but we want the legend here above. Because what I will strip away is this point all the way here to the bars. So let's do it one at a time. In the options, we're going to say here after the scale, so we're going to say comma, we say plugins. We're going to say here curly braces, legend, and then we say here curly braces, display equals false. Save that, refresh. Now we have no more legend. Alright, that is correct. Next thing what I want to do is we can remove the items here. We basically can remove all of these here, but I will leave the values in place. So if I save this, refresh, we now remove everything and we're getting closer. But you might say, oh look, it's destroying the entire look and feel of the chart. That is correct. We're going to fine tune that later on. So everything else here, basically this data is important for us, that the data should be identical to whatever is in here. So you could copy this, or you can just grab the namespace of that, which is just this. The chart dot, sorry, that's not chart, but this is my chart, number 1, basically my chart, dot data sets index 0 dot data. So what I'm really doing here is I'm just referencing to my chart, and from my chart we jump immediately to the data sets index 0 and then data. By doing this, if I save this, refresh, you can see here nothing changes, but all the numbers are still in here. And if I do here, for example, a nice trick, let's say we're going to put in here 99, we should expect a adjustment below as well. As you can see, this works. So it understands intelligently that those two are directly connected. So now we have that part done. What I want to do is I want to make sure that this narrows down, because look at this, this is far too huge. So how do we do this? Well, to do this, we're going to use a few items. We need to have CSS and we need to have some HTML div elements in here. So let's start to work on that. So what I'm going to do here in this chart box, what I want to have here is basically a new div, and this div is will be specifically nesting this canvas here above. So I'm going to say here class, and what we can say here maybe is the scroll box. We call this a scroll box, but you can give it anything you want, and that's a class. And this scroll box will be important, but then we have here what we call the scroll box, not a div, class, and I'll just name this a scroll box body. Makes sense. So one is maybe the header, other one is the body, something like that. So here, closing this as well. So why is this important? Well, first of all, how this canvas gets its size is based on a div. So that's why Chart.js documentation indicates you need to make sure you have a div nested, or at least the canvas has been nested within a div. And the reason for that is so it will grab the height and the width of that by default. So if I save this right now and refresh, nothing changes here. And this is important because this one here will be dynamic based on whatever the chart is. However, the scroll box will make sure that this one creates a scrollable effect that might be smaller than whatever is in here, and that basically creates the scroll effect in CSS. So what I'm going to do here is for the scroll box, make it very simple. Dot scroll box. I'll say CSS here, and I say let's give it a height of maybe 500 pixels. But then what I want to do is I want to have a maximum height. So the max height will be 250 pixels. Meaning if we are surpassing this height, we're basically missing a chunk of it. So if I save this and refresh, you might see here, we're not really missing it, but you can see now it's overlapping, which can be a useful trick as well to use. But this can be tricky if you are going to have this small and big sizes. So what I want to do here is the following. I want to say enter, and I want to make sure that there's a scroll effect. So I'm going to say overflow. Basically, that's what we're having here. It's overflowing on one element to another element. And what I want to do is, if it's a overflow of Y, which means the vertical level, in that case, create a scroll bar. Save, refresh, and now you can see here we already have this scroll bar here working. But of course, we still have to fix this one. So we have now one part done. Although we still have to remove all of these items as well. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down and start working on, let's modify chart 1, I guess. That would be the best one. Let's remove these items here, these tick marks and the numbers or the labels here on the scale. So I'll go down here, and then here we have here the Y scale says begin at 0, but doesn't make any sense because now we have a category axis here because we swapped them, and here are the numbers. So we should start at X at 0. By default everybody does, but just to force this. So then what I want to say here for the grid, because what I want to remove is these tick marks, which is basically this line from here to there. So I'm going to say here draw ticks, and then I'm going to say here false. Save, refresh. Now you can see the ticks are removed, but what we're missing, or what we still have to do, is removing these labels. So let's start to remove those labels as well. How do we do that? Say comma here, and then I'm going to say here ticks, because those labels are called ticks. So we're going to remove now the ticks here. We're going to say here display equals false. Save that, refresh, and as you can see here, now it starts to work. But if you look very carefully, you might notice that here is what we call a border line, and this is the border. It's like this one here. They are slightly darker gray compared to this. As you can see, this is lighter because here's like two lines on top of each other. I want to remove these two lines on top of each other. Why? Because we have this here. So it will be redundant and doesn't make any sense. So what I'm going to do here, in the grid, comma, say here, draw border, and then we say here, false. Save, refresh. Now you can see here the color is identical. And they're not that dark compared to this one here. And later on we will notice that as well. So now we've done basically most of this, although later on we still want to make this slightly more dynamic with height increments, but that's later on. Let's fix this item here. So now what we have to do is we have to work on the second chart. So I go to the data number 2, or more specifically in the configs, because we need to play around with the options here. So what I want to do now is I'm going to say here, let's see, well, we have a few items to work on. We have to make sure that we have enough space from here to here to make sure that we match this. We have, oh, I realize that we are still forgetting this part here, so I will have to get that later on. So let's start to do this chart, or I guess we should go back first and just fix chart 1. Don't leave the stuff undone. So how do we do this part here? And that one is slightly more tricky. And for this, we can luckily give what we call padding. And although not that tricky, because we can just say here the layout. But the tricky part will be to get the exact coordinates or pixel amount. And what I want to do here, layout, and then let's say here padding. And then we want to pinpoint the padding. Where do I want to put the padding? On the right side. So I'm going to say here right equals maybe 10 pixels if I save this. Refresh. You can see here we're still slightly off. I'm not sure if you're able to see this. As you can see here, it's just slightly off. If I zoom in, slightly, or maybe just perfect. It's very hard to say. Later on we can see more better, and then of course we can fine tune it. It's usually maybe 1 or 2 pixels off, but that's alright. We'll look at it later on. However, now we have covered that part. So, and if you look very carefully, I do see here maybe we are just not really 1 pixel off. Maybe put it 9.5 or something like that. I think we would probably be better. Alright, that's fine for now. So now, if I scroll down, alright, we got all of that. What I want to do now is start to play around with the remaining. How do we reduce this size here? Well, what I'm going to do here is, first of all, I'm going to say here, in the options, I'm going to say here, maintain aspect ratio, and set this on false. Save, and then refresh. By doing so, alright, we did that for this one as well. I guess that we had to do this still, but I realized. But anyway, doesn't matter. We're going to leave that one as false, because we want to make it dynamic later on. For the options, we're doing the same here. And then right now, alright, you can see here we get this, I guess it's a never-ending item, because probably we're forgetting something here. So let's comment this out, save, and refresh. And let's reduce the size of this first. So if I go up here in the chart, and this is the reason why your chart needs to be enclosed with a div, and you might say, well, isn't it already enclosed in the chart box? Yes, but that doesn't count. It must be a dedicated div for that chart that is more recommended. So what I'm going to do here is, well, I'm just going to grab this name here, but I'll just give it something better. Let's say this is just our box. Doesn't matter so much what you give it as name, as long as your like container, it contains the item itself. So maybe that's even a better name, but that's alright for now. So I'm going to say here dot box or container, and then I'm going to say here the height. I'm going to do the height on purpose very, very minimal, maybe 50 pixels, and then we're going to save that, then refresh. Alright, so now we have this, and that 50 pixels will be fine, but I want to make sure that everything else is correct as well. So let's scroll down here. We have this one. Let's remove that now. Save, refresh. Alright, so now you can see it will just only require a little bit of space. What we need to do then is basically we're going to move this a little bit to the right side, and then we have to look what we can do more is probably we can even make this even more narrow. So let's start to look what we have to do here. What we can do here is in the X scale, and I guess here for this one, We also do an X scale because this is still the numbers. Save that, refresh, alright. And then here we're going to say comma, and let's push this part more to the right. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the after fit. So after fit. So this functionality is a built-in functionality in Chart.js. And let's give this a name, context, function error expression, do it like that. And then what I want to do is, first of all, I want to show you what this really does. So if I say here console log, and then we do this, save, refresh, open up developer tab. So once you do this, and then I notice I don't get any message. Apparently I'm on the error, so I click on this one here. We can see here the information. So what we get here is the most important one is the width here, and the width would basically calculate the width from this point all the way to there, which we need to reduce, or more specifically, I need to reduce the width and I need to calculate how much is from this point to there. So to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some data that I guess here some data we need to calculate the item, and I realized I'm even on the wrong scale here, sorry. So let's leave this for now because we'll be doing this later on. But I'll just explain later on what we're doing there, because I need to focus on the Y scale for this. And that is, you might be confused on this, why are we pinpointing on the Y scale, which basically focus on the vertical compared to horizontal on the X scale. I guess there's some technical structuring in that, so I cannot really explain that. I haven't found any answer on that. Anyway, doesn't matter. All what matters is that we're going to get a working model. So I'm going to say here again, after fit, and then in here you can say here context, and then go to function error expression to make a callback functionality, and then in here we have to do the console log, and the console log will be the context here. If I save this, refresh, we get the items here and it loads twice, doesn't matter, just same. And what we need is here is the width. We have the width here, and what we want to do is this width, I guess maybe that's the logical part, is how much is the space from here to there. That's probably the width on the scale before it starts to draw the item. But anyway, what I want to do is I want to increase the width by X amount. So we're going to say here dot width will be now the dot width. We will now add up additional items. So we do this. All right, you can see that. But then what I want to do here is I want to say this width will be plus equal, let's say 20. Save that, refresh, and as you can see here, it starts to change. However, how would we measure from this point all the way to there? Well, we can do that by calculating this point here. Basically, this is the chart area line on the left to the beginning, and we can calculate that specific area. So what I'm going to do here is, let me just show you. Do a console log. I'm going to say a chart, my chart, and then my chart dot chart area dot left, and this basically calculates this point to here, or how many pixels is from here all the way to this line here. So if I save this, refresh, open up developer tab, and you can see here we get 38 plus. So all what I want to do is I want to have that amount of pixels added to our item. So I'm going to grab this, and we're going to say here on the width, let's do this, save, refresh. And you can see here, I guess there's two reasons why it's too much here. The reason why is the tick mark. The tick mark needs to be removed here, so I'm going to remove that. Comma, I'm going to say here grid, because it's a grid line part. Then I'm going to say here tick marks. Draw ticks. And I'm going to say here false. Save that, refresh, and then we should have this. Alright. So now we fix this part, and later on I'm going to fine tune this more, but let's reduce the space between this point all the way here down. Because right now, if I just open up my console log, we have too much space here. Alright, and I guess this one is basically, let me just remove this first. That's this part here. Remove that. Alright, let me get all of this. This is still the scroll box. How big is this? This is 182 pixels. So what I want to do is in the scroll box here, the height is 500. The minimum height is that, let's say 100 pixels. Alright, so we get this one there. So you can see here we're getting very close to everything here, but we need to fine tune this part. So I'm going to scroll down here now, and what we're going to do here is on chart number 2, config number 2, we're going to work on the height. So we're going to say basically here was the width, here we did the width, and here we're going to work on the height. So it's exactly the opposites. So what we need to do here is, well, let's calculate. Let's calculate how many pixels of height we want to see here even. I guess maybe from this point to there only. So what I'm going to say here, or we have to just play around with that, we can say yes, context dot height will be maybe plus equal 10 if I save that. Alright, as you can see here now we're getting smaller. And if I do plus 20, it gets smaller and smaller, and then you will see here we're going to have some space here. This is the only tricky part. I cannot solve the space between here. However, it is still quite acceptable. So what I'm going to do here, this amount of space here is 30. I think 30 is just too much, or it's perfect. Alright, there you are. So you can see here now it starts to look quite nice. But of course we're not done, because we have the maintain aspect ratio here. Save that, refresh. And what I did here was this. If I do this back to 250, we probably will lose or have this excess of space. Alright, so what we have to do now is trying to work around on this, making sure that this is increasing in size. So let's see what we need to do. So what we're going to do now is basically build a functionality that would basically force our chart in a maximum size. So let's start to look at that. So we're going to scroll down here. We can remove all of this. We don't need this. But what I do want here is to create a constant, and this constant we will give it a proper name. Let's see, what is the item that I want to pinpoint. It will be our scroll body box, if I'm not mistaken. It's the one that controls the size of it, because this is probably the issue here. We don't have a real size for it, and then Chartjs is automatically grabbing this part here. But what we want to do, we want to push it in a height, but we want to make sure it will be, of course, flexible enough that if we have more items that we are able to scroll as well. So let's scroll down. We say this constant here equals, and then we're going to say a document dot get, oh sorry, not document dot query selector. And then what this truly means is the following. Go search in the HTML document, and query means search. So search in the document for a selector name, and the selector is basically a tag. So what we're going to search for, which tag specifically, the scroll body, the scroll box body class. So that's why I put a dot here for the class. So once I did this in here, and then what I want to do here is basically control the length of that one, and let's give it a specific height. So we're going to say if my chart dot data, and basically what I'm going to do is I want to measure if we have more length or more bars than 7, and this here already is not even good, we have to fine tune that. If we have more than 7, we want to make sure that this become bigger so we can scroll. So what we're going to do here, data dot labels. Basically we're just getting the labels, how many labels we have, dot length. We say if this length is larger than 7, or length, yeah, 7, that's correct, because we have like a full week, it would be this point here. In that case, what I want to do is I want to create a new constant, which consists of a name of new height, and let's give it a default of 300 pixels, and a plus whatever the length is, times 20 pixels for every bar. However, if our length is 7, we already have a calculated of 300 by default. So if we add up this 20, it would add up far too much space. So what I want to do here, I'm going to say length minus 7, my chart length minus the 7 basically. Alright, that's fine. And then we're going to make sure that that will be multiplied by that. Of course, this is just a default, and we can probably soft code this with a value, so you can check how many items you want to have by default. So we have this one here, and if this is the case, then what I want to do is I want to grab this and say here dot style dot height and assign a new height for that. And for this, I want to give a template literals, and what template literals do is backtick, and we can use here $sign for the variable. We're going to just grab this formula, put that in here, and then we say here pixels for easy concatenation. So if I save this, refresh, alright, interesting, we get this one now, but I do see that I'm still missing an item here. But let's test this if we would have more data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just duplicate this for now, put that in there, and then we say here, look, we have new values. Save that, refresh, alright. So this works, but then what I want to do is, what about if we do this back? What are we missing here? So I have to check this one quickly. Alright, so after some checking, I realized, very simple issue, we forgot to define a default height on this. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to set a default height on this. We can do it here down, or we can do it in CSS. I guess CSS would be more sensible to do and more logical. So I'm going to copy the scroll box body, and let's say here dot this, and then we can say here the height will be equal to or at least 300 pixels. And then if there's 300 pixels, or maybe even a default of 250, then you have a default without scroll, or just within the threshold. So I think 300 would be fine. So if I do this, you always have a scroll. So you might say, well, I want to do 250. So you should not have a scroll at the very beginning. But once we add up one new value, so let's add out here one new value, 1, and then we put in here this, we should expect here a new or a scrollable bar. As you can see here, the chart changes immediately, and if I move this, you can see this as well, it will change nicely. Absolutely phenomenal. And that's basically how we can do this. Let's maximize this and make this a huge massive chart. 1, 2, and 3. Alright, so then here we're going to triple this as well. 1, 2, and 3. Save, refresh. And you can see here the bars, they might get slightly more tiny, so you could change the amount of pixels that you want to increment here, maybe to 30 pixels. That's up to you. But you can see here, it will be still very readable. Of course, once you have a lot of items, maybe the space here needs to be a fixed 30 pixels, how much, depending on how much space by default a bar needs. But as you can see here, we have this really nice scrollable bar. And you can see that this X scale here will maintain in its original position. And that's basically how we can do this. So if you enjoyed this video and maybe you want to have, for example, instead of a horizontal bar chart, maybe you want to have like buttons for the left and right for a vertical bar chart, in that case I'm going to recommend you this item here, or this video, which is on how to create buttons that scroll the chart left and right in Chart.js. And these buttons are created within the canvas itself, which is absolutely amazing to see. So I would recommend you this video as well to explore.